Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now in today's one we're gaming at 8K or upscaled 8K using DLSS 4 and this the RTX 4070 Super. This 12GB card is pretty capable at 1440p and even 4K, but 8K, 4320p? Well, let's see what happens. Some games have DLSS 4 as standard now, but if they don't, we can force it using the NVIDIA app or NVIDIA Profile Inspector, as well as third-party programs. I'm using NVIDIA Profile Inspector to override DLSS on a global level. That sounds a bit sinister, but what I mean is I'm using the global profile and enabling the DLL override and forced preset letter options to force DLSS4 in all of my games. I had to revert to an older graphics driver, version 572.60, as Profile Inspector kept crashing with the latest driver release at the time of this video. DLSS 4 can look noticeably better than older versions, as you might be able to tell in this GTA 5 enhanced side-by-side footage. That said, it can also be more intensive, as is the case with my 4070 Super, knocking a few frames off of our average. You might find that using a lower tier option with DLSS 4, for example balanced, can look just as good as the quality preset with older versions of DLSS though. But let's play some games at upscaled 8K and see what sort of experience we get with this 12GB GPU. I had to record internally today because my capture card had an absolute meltdown when going above 4K. I actually used the NVIDIA overlay and it turns out I recorded all of the footage in full 8K resolution. What an idiot, the files are massive. I'm not sure if I'll actually upload this video in full resolution. The quality will probably be severely diminished after processing anyway, but it should at least be in 2160p. We'll start with Cyberpunk 2077, and even though this one has DLSS 4 by default, I left the override enabled throughout, using the latest DLSS preset available. I haven't played any online games. I'm not sure if this will interfere with any anti-cheat stuff, but I didn't think it was worth the risk, so I've just stuck with single player today. First of all then we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 4320p with medium and the crowds set to high. Now DLSS is set to ultra performance here, and internally this is running at 2560 by 1440 and upscaling to 8K resolution. Now usually when we select ultra performance, for example at 1080p, we'll be running at something like 360p I believe, so this is certainly different to the usual resolution that we're testing on the channel. As you can see, performance I think is pretty decent, and I've targeted plus 30 FPS in this one because trying to hit 60 frames per second requires too much of a visual sacrifice, and in most cases it's downright impossible. You're going to notice the VRAM of the 4070 Super pretty much maxing out throughout the entirety of this video, but I think it's a pretty solid start from Cyberpunk 2077 here. Now because this is GTA 5 enhanced, I thought we may as well turn on the ray tracing options because otherwise it doesn't really look too different from the standard game. I think if you want to play the enhanced version you're going to want the RT settings, and so I went with the very high RT preset with DLSS performance this time around. So we're not upscaling from 1440p here, in fact I recall this being 3840 by 2160, so we're actually upscaling from 4K to 8K here with again plus 30 frames per second. We averaged around about 40, at least that's what it looks like from the footage, and as you can see once again basically all of our VRAM has been allocated here. Now I think GTA 5 Enhanced looks pretty decent with all the ray tracing effects enabled. It's not as much of an upgrade as some people would like, but the game itself is really old now. You are going to need a fairly beefy graphics card to make the most of the visuals with everything turned way up, but as you saw before, I found that it ran pretty decent on my 4060, so that's a mainstream GPU which seems to be able to handle the ray tracing effects as well. On the 4070 Super, an upscaled 8K, it's not too difficult to hit plus 30 frames per second, but don't go turning DLSS off across any of these games because it'll be a slideshow. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, or more like Indiana Jones and the Great Bald Patch, because for some reason when I started this game Indy had no hair. I guess that's what he keeps hidden under that hat. I never would have guessed. When I did get it running with the lowest settings and DLSS Ultra Performance, it felt as though Indy himself was hopping everywhere, but it turns out it was just some severe stutter. You can probably pick it up on the frame time graph, which is like zigzagging all over the place. It felt like I was either hopping or taking tiny little jumps to move throughout the game. This was not consistent at all, but we did see plus 30 frames per second. Now this one will actually gobble up all of my VRAM when using just 4K resolution and a 4070 Super. And of course, even here with the lowest settings and this super high resolution, it's no surprise that our card is struggling. Still, plus 30 FPS. This almost looks crisper as to all the games that my eyeballs will actually let me see, if that makes sense. 8K looks better than my actual vision. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has received an update, a pretty big update. I think it was about 60 gigabytes. But what it did do, one thing I noticed straight away, was that it allows us to now choose DLSS 4 from the menu, so no override required. I did keep it enabled anyway though in NVIDIA Inspector, just because it saved turning it off and on all the time. With the medium settings here and DLSS performance, so upscaling from 2160p, I believe this time around. We don't have an ultra performance mode here. We saw plus 30 FPS. With low, didn't make too much of a difference actually. We saw about 2 or 3 frames per second more. Of course, because I am recording internally, we do see more of a performance impact. So whatever you're seeing on screen here, you can add 3, 4 or 5 frames per second onto that. The averages were actually taken, as well as the percentile lows, before I was recording, so that's the actual figures that you're going to get, but what you're seeing in the recordings here may be a little less. I'm going to say probably a 10% drop in performance, considering I was recording in 8K. I don't think that's that bad, actually, but worth bearing in mind. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 looks fantastic, even at medium, and at this high resolution, it is a wonder to behold. Alright, so I didn't bother with benchmarking Marvel's Spider-Man 2. I'll tell you why. Well, actually, I don't need to tell you why. You can see why. We couldn't really hit any higher than 6, 7 FPS. Everything's basically missing here. The very low settings don't usually look this bad, but I guess this is probably due to the VRAM limitation as well. Yeah, it's certainly not playable by any extent of the imagination, unfortunately. This is probably the most intensive title that I tried today with the 4070 Super at 4320p. Now, I'm so used to playing Red Dead Redemption 2 at 30 FPS because I tend to play it on the PS5 that it really doesn't bother me, and it actually feels nice and playable with plus 30 frames per second. Plus I play in third person most of the time, so I think it's still acceptable. You may have different views, of course, but here we was actually able to use the ultra textures. I set everything else to medium and the game looks fantastic. This is with DLSS performance. We do have an ultra performance mode, and if we select that, we're going to see about 4-5 frames per second more. So I thought for the sake of a slightly overall crisper image, we may as well just go with performance instead, boost things up a little bit, and I think it was worth the sacrifice of a few frames. Looks absolutely fantastic, and I hope the visuals are coming through on the video as well. Now, one game that really surprised me performance-wise was Starfield. You all know how demanding this can be, but here I even pushed it to the medium settings and still saw plus 30 frames per second with DLSS Ultra Performance. So we're upscaling from 2560 by 1440, if I recall, and aside from the average of 44 FPS, the percentile lows were pretty good too, 35 and 26 respectively. As always, I'm causing chaos in and around Aquila here, and I didn't really see any drops below 30 frames per second, at least not outside of recording. It's weird, it's so sharp, it hurts my eyes in some places. I still very much enjoy Starfield, to be honest. I know a lot of you will have differing views on that, but it's one of those ones I just like to jump into and explore for hours, and before you know it, I've wasted a whole day just exploring various planets and such. At 8K on the 4070 Super, it's running alright as well. I could have used a beefier graphics card. I have a 5070 Ti that I got for testing a while back, but I wanted to use something that was slightly more affordable and available, but also something that actually stood a chance of being able to run 8K upscaled as well. I tried it on the 4060 first of all, and nah, it just wasn't happening. We will finalise with The Witcher 3. I'm using the DX12 version, the next-gen version of the game, simply because the DX11 version wouldn't start. At 8K resolution, it just crashed every time. So I don't know if it actually doesn't support it or what, but I had to use this version, and unfortunately we couldn't quite hit 30 frames per second. Now, interestingly, there were moments where we did hit 30 frames per second. Every so often the game would just be like yeah, okay, I'll give you 30 FPS for a few moments, and we saw like 30 to 35, and then it would just drop again. So probably a VRAM thing, or a super high resolution thing, of course. But I guess it's playable in some places, but probably not most of the time. We're running it at the lowest settings as well with DLSS Ultra Performance, and still not quite doable. But there we go, the 4070 Super tackling 8K upscaled with DLSS 4. Games that look nice and sharp, nice and crisp. I'd recommend trying it out for yourselves. Perhaps not at 8K, but I mean upscaling to 4K also looks decent, but you know me, I like to do things at the extreme level. It's either running things at 72p or 4320p. Maybe I'll do a comparison, that'll be interesting. Thank you for watching though, leave your thoughts down below, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.